Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing ih8sens in the 15-minute pool on ICC. This is a player that I recognize. I think I recognize their username from chess.com. So they open with d4. What to play today? Let's play d5. I might go with my usual repertoire, play a semi-Slav. And they play the e3 variation. I do like bishop f5 in this case. You do have the opportunity to develop the light square bishop outside the chain, and I suggest taking it in that case. It's telling that Grandmaster Alexei Dreyev, who's a huge expert in the semi-Slav, also plays bishop f5 on move 4. Here there's bishop g6, bishop e4, and bishop g4 in order of reliability, in my opinion. Bishop e4 is dynamic. It encourages white to play f3 and kick the bishop. I normally play bishop g6. I think this is overall the best move. Bishop g4, while attacking the white queen, would invite queen b3, hitting the pawn on b7. And that bishop on g4 is just going to get chased by white's pawns anyways. White will play h3 and a later g4. Okay, so bishop d2. This is a line I've faced before. I'll just play knight bd7. I'm at my peak rating right now, 2439. I've benefited from a nice run in the 15-minute pool. Knock on wood. Can't jinx myself, right? So white takes on g6, and in this case, you always take with the h-pawn. You would only take with the f-pawn if there was some concrete reason why doing so is good. Otherwise, taking with the h-pawn, keeping a compact structure with a single island is the best thing to do, and also getting the file. So one plan that white often employs with this kind of a waiting setup, to be honest, playing bishop d2, queen c2, not committing this light square bishop. If I play bishop d6, I think there's a good chance they're going to play c5, and then after bishop c7, play f4, and try to establish a clamp. I did have a game in a Minnesota Open 2 years ago against FIDE master Eric Santarius, where it went something like bishop d6, c5, bishop c7, f4, and then I broke out with g5. I'm just trying to recall if it was this exact position or if it was a slightly different position, because the move order does matter. So let me consider that. Bishop d6, c5, bishop c7, f4. And the idea of f4 is to discourage black from playing e5. White tries to establish a clamp in the center, and they want to prevent my main pawn break, which is often e5, especially if they have a pawn on c5. So if I play g5 in that case, and let's say they take it, f takes g5, I can play knight g4. That brings a lot of heat down on their pawn on h2. So I like the look of that. Bishop d6, moreover, is a normal move. Let's play it. I'm just going to check my opponent's stats real quick. He castles immediately. In his notes, he says he's a Canadian national master, Canadian rating of 2298. It's pretty decent. So castles, this pawn on h2 is lacking defenders, but it would be dangerous to take because my bishop could get trapped with g3. I may consider playing knight g4 and trying to go after f2, but at the moment knight g4 looks like a shot in the dark almost. They can defend f2 with bishop e1, and then I would have to decide if I really want to take that pawn. I think that's still a poisoned pawn. So in this case, I want to consider moves like taking on c4, and then after bishop takes c4, following with b5. Maybe a6. a6 would be a logical move as well. I like a6 because this actually prepares in many cases to play d takes c4, bishop takes c4, b5, and then after the bishop moves back, say bishop d3 or bishop e2, I can play c5. And it's nice that the pawn that will be on b5 is defended. So this is a way to make progress on the queen side. If I want to pawn storm white's king and push like my b pawn, for instance, it has ample backup. And I'm also preparing to take on c4. Yeah, king b1 is a normal move. White just hides the king a bit better. And they might be trying to avoid moving this bishop until I capture on c4, so they can just take in one fell swoop. So if d takes c4, bishop takes c4, b5, let's say bishop to d3. c5. There's some alignment issues on the d file that I have to be a little concerned about. It would be interesting to play d takes c4, bishop takes c4, rook c8. Then I could back up my c-pawn push a bit better. I think I'm going to do that. Yeah, rook c8. There might be some issue with like bishop takes e6, but I think it's minor. I mean, if white pulls the trigger on it now, bishop takes e6, f takes e6, queen takes g6 check, I just have king f8. White only has 2 pawns for the piece, and my king is safe enough. White could play e4 right now, but I was just thinking bishop e7, just drop back and maintain a solid structure. Again, I don't want to take on h2. My bishop's just asking to be trapped if I take on h2. So we'll do this. Outwardly, this looks nice for white because they have the bishop pair plus 2 pawns in the center. But I am going to play b5 and probably c5 if I get a chance. So I don't feel that much worse, if at all. They've been playing pretty quick so far. We're 13 moves into the game, and they've used less than 2 minutes. But I would think that they'll start slowing down a bit now because my queenside pawn play is significant. h3, I don't know about that move. Maybe intending to play g4, but it doesn't do much to address b5 followed by c5. b5, let's say bishop e2, that seems like the best square. c5, d takes c5. I could take with the knight, the rook, or the bishop in that case. Taking with the knight would be most active. Okay, well, I'm going to play b5 regardless, so let's do it. We'll see if h3 proves to be a good move for white. Considering that I'm probably going to go short with my king, maybe they shouldn't push the h-pawn because they might want to play h4 later. Try to pawn storm me. So I'm trying to use white's time to figure out what I want to play next, whether it will be c5 or possibly castles. And just wait on c5 for another move. There's also b4 chasing the knight, but let's say bishop e2 is played. I don't like b4 because it leaves the a6 pawn undefended. White could play knight a4, and then bishop takes a6 would be a threat. c5 would be the most consistent move. So I'm leaning towards that move at the moment. Bishop e2, c5. Let's say d takes c5. Knight takes c5. Bishop e3, attacking my queen. I can just sidestep, play queen c7. Yeah, that looks fine for black. A lot of times in Slav or semi-Slav positions, black is playing b5 in order to free a light square bishop. But it's interesting that black does this anyways in this so-called slow Slav opening because you want to gain play on the queen side, and this is the primary way to do it. So even though I traded off my light square bishop for white's knight on move 8, we're still willing to push these pawns, especially since white has castle queenside. This strikes me as a very odd place for the bishop. Out of the 3 squares that make sense, d3, e2, and b3, to me this is the most illogical. I mean, f1 would be out of the question, but because after I play c5, I'll be threatening c4, so it almost obligates white to capture on c5. And then if, say, I take with my knight, I'll be holding that light square bishop hostage. c5, d takes, knight takes. And the only benefit to playing this move is to keep the bishop trained on the e6 pawn, but this pawn is well defended. I don't see how that will benefit white. is the idea c5, d5, but then I can just play c4. So I really don't get it. c5, d5, c4. Let's say d takes e6, f takes e6, e5 maybe, knight takes e5, bishop f4, I have knight d3. And nothing really makes sense for white. Okay. You have to trust your instincts, and if your opponent plays an idea that, after you've looked at it, still doesn't make sense to you, you just have to stop trying to penetrate into their thought process and trust your read on the situation. So I was going to play knight takes. Seems to make the best sense. Is bishop h6 a problem? That's a move I overlooked. Knight takes c5, bishop h6. That's a weird move, but it could be a good one. For that reason, maybe I should castle or even play queen c7 right away. Queen c7 could be decent. Okay, so I will admit to having missed knight takes c5, bishop h6, attacking my queen and also this pawn. That was an oversight. But I have two other good captures. I mean, even rook takes c5 is pretty challenging, threatening b4. It exposes our rook a bit out there, but, well, I probably shouldn't do it right away. Rook takes c5, bishop to e3, attacking the rook. And then maybe e5 is an issue. Queen c7 is my backup move in all these cases. Still like that move. Castles also looks fine. Let's go with queen c7. This also takes away the f4 square from white's bishop, so they can't play bishop f4. This does sometimes occur in this line. You'll play c5 and white will take the pawn, but you won't go to recapture it right away. You'll just let it sit there for a moment while you coordinate or perhaps create some other threat. Because since white can't play b4, especially with this bishop on b3, there's not a good way for them to defend it. I'm attacking it 4 times, and it's not defended at all. This guy has a finger note that says, "No particular style, any type of position is fine by me, as long as it's objectively sound." So he's saying he's a universalist. You see that increasingly with chess players these days, especially grandmasters. They're less taken with one particular style. There's not as many people trying to be specialists. They're more looking to be good at everything. And I think at the very top level, Super GM level, you pretty much have to be to exploit the small edges that are available these days in chess. e5. Wow, that's sharp. So inviting me to take it with the knight or the queen. If knight takes, I think their idea is bishop f4. But what if queen takes? Because then I can avoid bishop f4 with a pin. And this c5 pawn is still looking pretty dead, isn't it? Queen takes e5. I don't get their follow-up. I mean, c6, I can play rook takes c6. Yeah, I don't believe that move. Hence why I'm going to take. And if, say, rook he1, maybe queen f5, looking for a queen swap, and still c5 will be a goner. And there's also rook he1, queen takes c5, of course, as well. Maybe here they're planning if queen takes c5, bishop takes e6, bombs away on this square. Queen takes c5, bishop takes e6, f takes e6, queen takes g6 check, king f8. I would doubt that even there white has compensation, although that looks a little more scary. I can play queen f5. Queen f5 will ensure the queen trade, and I should just be able to win this pawn without allowing any funny business sacrifices. queen f5. Let's say queen takes f5, g takes f5. Then let's say a4 maybe, attacking my pawn on b5, b4, knight a2. I could just take c5. That's also excellent for me. Yeah, let's go here. Because I think this pawn will be lost anyways. I don't think I have to take it right away. I think I can hold off on that. Simply offer a queen trade and maybe continue with bishop takes c5 or knight takes c5 thereafter. We'll pre-move this capture. I don't want to take with the e pawn and open up the e file. I want to take towards the center with the g pawn and keep my king protected. And so long as that bishop's sitting on b3, white has no chance to assist this pawn. They need that bishop elsewhere so they can play b4 if they want to hold c5. Yeah, here, if white has something, it'll be something dynamic, like a sacrifice or a further investment of material, because otherwise it just seems they're going to be losing a pawn. White has all their pieces centralized, but I think in the face of my strong pawn center, it's hard to imagine them doing anything too devastating. He actually just resigned. Wow. That seems premature, but I mean, I think black is pretty much going to be up a pawn, and it'll be a conversion phase after that. I would not have resigned, though. Certainly with me not, being close to having to play a blitz game. So it seems like a poor decision by ih8sens to play bishop b3. Like, this move might be dubious, but especially e5. Like, that move was completely uncalled for. He played it fairly fast, too. Okay, let's have a look at this short game. So e3 characterizes the slow Slav. In playing this move, white defends the pawn on c4. Usually this is played by players who do not want to face a Slav variation, since if white plays knight c3, which is far and away the most popular move, black can take on c4 and enter the Slav. And there's a good segment of d4 players who just don't like facing this opening. So they'll play e3 very soon. I mean, likewise, e3 is even playable on move 3. It's pretty conservative, but there's nothing inherently wrong with doing this. So, as played, I mentioned that Alexei Dreyev, the semi-Slav expert, I looked at his games a while back, and he almost always prefers bishop f5. He universally plays this move, which is surprising because black can enter a semi-Slav with e6, and then play knight bd7, and we have a typical semi-Slav variation. It could transpose into a main line, in fact. But I just mentioned that because getting the bishop outside the chain is so important in the Slav and also the semi-Slav that if you're handed this opportunity to do so, then you might as well take it. Now, black can get away with this because white doesn't have as much pressure on d5 as they would like. So for instance, if white played c takes d5, c takes d5, queen b3, this would only be attacking the b7 pawn with the queen because d5 is well guarded. And black could assign the queen to go defend the b7 pawn and not worry about dropping this. You can see that black's knight is defending that. Compare it to the following variation, which is knight c3 on move 3 for white, also playable. If knight f6, e3, now bishop f5 is riskier for black because after c takes d5, c takes d5, queen b3, white has two attackers on d5, and they still have the queen takes b7 threat. So it's the same position except there's a white knight on c3, this knight's back on g1, as opposed to the opposite scenario with the white knight on f3 and this knight back on b1. Some black players are trying to make this work, actually. Black can even play the somewhat silly move, but possibly sound response, bishop c8, keeping the queen to defend d5, and just backing the bishop up and kind of admitting like, hey, you got me. I realized that I might have made a mistake. And recently I've seen the following gambit, knight c6, queen takes b7, and now bishop d7, which I don't know if black gets full compensation for this, but I've actually been in a similar scenario from the white side, and it wasn't easy to prove that the pawn matters. I think here white's probably going to be better after something like queen b3 and maybe a full-on retreat, but it's something for black to consider. Black has some open lines on the queen side in the style of a Benko gambit. But that's the difference between knight f3 and knight c3 on move 3 as it pertains to the d5 pawn. So long story short, bishop f5 is sound on move 4 in the Slow Slav, and I suggest playing it. Knight c3, e6. So if white plays some banal move here like bishop e2, black ought to be happy. In fact, black can even take the time out to play h6 and ensure that knight h4 will always be met by bishop h7, because there's not enough direct pressure on black's position to punish him for having played h6 this early. Hence why the critical move is the one my opponent played, which is knight h4, hunting down the bishop. And I mentioned the 3 options for black here. They're all bishop moves: bishop g6, bishop e4, and bishop g4. I've either played them or faced them in the case of bishop g4. As black here, I've only ever played bishop g6 or bishop e4, but from the white side, I've faced this move, bishop g4, and queen b3 is a good response coming after the b7 pawn. I don't like this continuation as much because after, say, queen c7, white gains some time by attacking this bishop, and they get to chase it, and I don't think it's in black's best interest to allow white to throw the kingside pawns at him with tempo. Bishop e4 is interesting, though. I lost a game on the white side of this line to Alexander Strapunski, who's a big expert in this line for black, and the idea is even though white can take this bishop, they probably do not want to. After knight takes e4, black could try d takes e4, which threatens g5. Notice that this knight has been somewhat restricted, and the pawn on e4 takes away its flight square backwards. So g5 is a threat. Also, I think knight takes e4 is fine for black too, with a discovered attack on the knight and possibly bishop b4 check coming. So black need not fear a capture on e4 in this line. White can play f3 and chase the bishop. This is the main line. And then we get the same position as in the game, except the move f3 has been thrown in. And it's debatable whether that helps or hurts white. In some senses it helps because an e4 push could be enabled, but in other senses it hurts, mainly because white's king becomes more open. It's a little draftier around the king. You've already pushed the f-pawn. So, like I said, I normally play bishop g6, but I understand the concept behind bishop e4, and it's kind of a matter of choice. More dynamic players may like bishop e4 here, trying to induce the f3 weakness. I'm perfectly satisfied with the positions after bishop g6, hence I usually play this, but in the right circumstance, like especially if I really needed to win, I would try this move to shake it up. So bishop g6, and there's quite a bit of theory in this line. This entire Slow Slav complex was very popular when Boris Averuk released his d4 repertoire books for quality chess several years back, and you still see people playing this setup for white all the time. I mean, white hopes to just grab the bishop pair and grind out a small advantage. It's kind of an uphill battle because you saw how solid black's position was, but it's not a bad strategy. So white plays bishop d2. Yeah, oftentimes you'll see bishop e2 as well, simply developing. Sometimes white will even take on g6 right away, but there's not a real compelling reason to capture immediately. This bishop isn't going anywhere. So bishop d2, I just played knight bd7. In the semi-Slav, it normally makes sense to play knight bd7 before committing this bishop, because there are some cases where you won't necessarily put the bishop on d6. You might develop it to e7 or even b4, but there are very few scenarios where you will not put the knight on d7. So hence, knight bd7 is a necessary move, and bishop d6 may be a bit more expendable. And when you're debating between two developing moves, you should always try to play the necessary move over the expendable one. Oftentimes that occurs with castling. Like say you have a choice between castling or playing like a bishop out somewhere. Well, normally you're going to want to castle, so you should probably prioritize that, everything else being equal, over the bishop development. Unless the bishop development is an opportunity that might go away if you decide to castle instead. So white took on g6. I took back. So it's nice for black that even though I parted with the light square bishop, I have a bunch of pawns on light squares. So that shores up and covers for the fact that I have no light square bishop remaining. White played queen c2, bishop d6. So a possibility that I was describing during the game is c5, bishop c7, and now f4, obtaining a clamp. With the pawns on f4 and d4, black can scarcely think about playing e5 and breaking free in the center. But I do have this option of g5, which is probably the move I would have played had this position arisen. And then after f takes g5, knight g4, and there are a number of things black has going for them. I have queen takes g5, and I'm also hitting h2 3 times. So let's just see what the engine thinks about this position. Yeah, it very much likes black. So black has a huge initiative here. Yeah, so if this position had occurred, 11 g5, the computer also likes it. Like I said, I had an over-the-board game against FIDE master ih8sens that was incredibly similar to this. I think it was a little different. I want to say that Santarius' queen was on d1, and he had a bishop on d3. But I did the same thing. Actually, because in that case, white's queen would be controlling g4, so I'll have to try to go dig up that game. I think I have it in my database. I may post it in the comments, if so. But know that g5 is a move that black may play to gain space on the king side, or in the case of a pawn on f4, perhaps gain counterplay. So white castled. I thought about knight g4. I was describing this as an artificial move, but it's tempting because it attacks these 2 points. But taking h2, if that is a move that jumps out at you, I would caution you against that. I mean, let's say I take it with my rook, for instance. Take. If white plays g3, this is similar to that famous Spassky versus Fischer Game 1, their World Championship match in 1972, where Fischer grabbed the pawn on h2 and did not live to tell the tale. So you always want to be aware that the bishop can become trapped. And now I'm forced with some sort of convoluted extrication task where I have to try to get this out or somehow justify the bishop being walled in by white's pawns. So I played a6, so I'm looking to gain counterplay on the queen side. White is castled over there, and it's not enough for black to just sit back and rely on their solid structure. Black should be looking to play somewhat actively and choose the right spots to make a pawn break or otherwise gain counterplay on some area of the board. Because sitting back and waiting and just saying, oh, I have a solid position, all my pawns are together, I don't have many weaknesses, that's a recipe for getting pushed off the board by white's bishops and space advantage in the long run. So the way that you want to play this position is a little more actively. So a6, getting ready to take and then play b5, whereupon the pawn has great support. Yeah, white could revisit the c5 idea. c5 and say bishop here, maybe f4 again. Computer's still not sold on it. He wants to just play bishop e2 and develop. I sort of figured white would be hesitant to play c5, given that I can undermine that pawn on c5 with b6. And if they want to defend it, they'd have to go all in and play b4, and this makes white's king uncomfortable. So the computer may be overstating the strength of c5. I don't know that it's that great. In any case, it doesn't seem to lead to too much. White played king b1. That move is reasonable because there's going to be exchanges down the c file, and white just wants to vacate that file. So I took c4. My opponent responded with takes, and I went rook c8. Yeah, so this move was just to lend more support to the coming c5 advance. I didn't feel like I had to play b5 or c5 immediately. I'm just going to line up with white's queen and proceed from there. e4, threatening e5 with a fork on the knight and the bishop. Yeah, seems reasonable. So I just drop back to e7. And I think round about here, white's play can be improved, because this is where they played h3, and I dislike that move. I think that move is slow. Computer likes white's position a lot. Bishop e2, b5, let's say. Bishop e3. And if I break here, maybe they're going to push past with d5. Yeah, something like that is possible. And one important point here is that white is threatening d6. So if I play like b4, they might play d6, or they might even break through in the center, d takes e, and threaten the knight on d7. Well, in that case, maybe I shouldn't have played rook c8. If what the computer is saying is true, maybe I should break immediately, and I may not have time to play rook c8. c5. It still likes white a little bit. Yeah, these positions are subtle. I know this from having experience on the white and black side of this line. It's like if black doesn't time the play correctly, white can turn out to be better. I might even have to go all the way back here. Maybe a6 is not accurate. I'm still not sold on bishop takes h2 like the computer's proposing, but maybe knight g4 is playable. Knight g4, but really not sure about this line. Rook takes h2, rook takes h2. You know, bishop takes or knight takes. Say bishop takes. So again, there's that g3 move. Yeah, from a human standpoint, I don't think you're going to get many takers from this from the black side. This is a position where a database would help me out a lot, because I bet this has been reached before, and that may tell us better than the engine even how best to play the position. I know the engine is almighty and all-powerful, but as black, I really just want to know how to play this position. I have some ideas, like, you know, a6 and rook c8, take, b5, c5, but if I saw like a 2600 GM in the database playing this position as black, they would probably play in a way that would help me in the next game that I get in this position, versus like kind of a random computer suggestion of selectively grabbing the pawn on h2 and hoping that you survive the consequences of doing so. So that's why when it comes to openings, I much prefer using databases and only checking the engine when the position is sharp enough to justify it, or the line is so obscure that there's no games to rely on. Otherwise, you should mainly be looking for human plans. You should try to identify ideas that other humans, other strong humans, have latched onto, because that's what's going to help you out in the game the most. That's probably what's going to stick around in your head. So I would say that, yeah, probably right here after bishop e7, white could get an advantage, maybe with the bishop e2 prophylactic move, bishop e3. Try to open the d file as soon as possible, because they might be able to respond to an eventual c5 with a d5 advance. But h3 costs time, and then after b5, I really don't like bishop b3. Just everything about this move is awkward to me. Huh, the computer wants to go bombs away and sack. That is possible here, isn't it? Take, take, and now e5. I can't recall if I looked at this in the game. Yeah, because this is different. If on the previous move, right here, white had sacrificed, or maybe it's kind of similar. Where was I looking at that sacrifice? I think it was on this move, wasn't it? Yeah, right when I played rook c8. Okay, I mentioned it here.
Check.
But the difference is, in this case, the e6 pawn is surviving. Had white done it at the time that the computer wanted to do it, so right after b5, or the computer was mentioning, that's different because after e5, my knight has to move. So white opens the way towards the g6 pawn, and if I want to save my knight, it has to move. So say knight d5, but then queen takes g6, check, king f8. Yeah, queen here at the very least will get 3 pawns for the piece. And this is suddenly unclear, and the computer likes white. Yeah, or take on d5 first. Because that way, if I take with the e-pawn, I assume that f7 is strong, hitting the knight and threatening queen f7 mate. Or sorry, e6 is strong, threatening queen f7 mate and the knight. So I probably should have paid more heed to the bishop takes e6 possibility. I don't think I even looked at it in this position. That's pretty bad. My opponent easily could have played that move. Fe, e5, king f7. So it says my best bet is to just protect g6 and allow e takes f6 and then try to shore up my pawns, but undoubtedly white would have gone for this if they had seen it. Yeah, my king is going to be somewhat exposed the rest of the game. Yeah, you see, I mean, it's easy to write off this game as something that I won without any effort, really, and, you know, white blundered a pawn and just resigned on to the next game, but I mean, I'm spending a good deal of time analyzing this because this is a line I play. I want to try to unearth the secrets of it. And I mean, this is giving me a new appreciation for bishop takes e6. That's something I can incorporate into my games in the future. So it underscores the importance of refusing to ignore your wins. You know, everyone says, like, analyze your losses. You're going to learn the most from your losses, but you can also learn a lot from your wins. I mean, we as humans have puny brains compared to engines, which don't have brains at all, but we have puny calculation powers compared to engines, and analyzing with an engine can often reveal some interesting stuff. Even in games that you feel proud of and you think you played well, you can come up with a lot of improvements. But yeah, I don't like bishop b3. I think that's a move that white should avoid in general. And bishop e2 seems better, as does the sacrifice. So bishop b3, c5. White can still do it. Yeah, bishop takes e6. They can still play that. But instead they took. Yeah, and here I think I was correct not to take the pawn back right away, because if I take with the knight, there's this move, bishop h4. Somehow this is fine for black, according to the computer. but I thought that the double attack would give me issues. I guess queen c7, bishop takes g7, rook h7, trapping this bishop, forcing it to trade. This gives me compensation according to the engine, but yeah, I don't know if I would willingly go for this position. I could see why I have some compensation, because white's minor pieces don't impress. And at the moment, white's extra pawn is not being felt. But still, it's a little sloppy to allow that for black when I can just play queen c7. And bishop takes e5. I don't think I like that one because of e5. This seemed dangerous. And if take, I'm again exposing myself to attacks down the file. So hence I played queen c7. This pawn can't be supported with b4, so I'm confident I'm going to win it back. And white just overreacted here and played e5. They have no advantage, but there was no reason to play e5 and give away a perfectly good pawn. With e5, I'm pretty sure they're hoping for knight takes e5, bishop f4 with a pin. Maybe I could escape the pin with this, but okay, there's tactical complications. Knight takes b5, opening up the queen on c5. And if I take with my queen, I lose to queen takes c8. And also, if I trade queens, then this knight is hanging. A takes b5, bishop takes e5, advantage white. But queen takes e5 seems to refute their play. Rook he1. Here I thought about this, but I thought they might just go ahead and play this. It would be in white's best interest to complicate the game and try to get into some unclear position, because the alternative is just being down a pawn with nothing to show for it. So when you're down material, you look for ways to kind of muddy the waters and give yourself a fighting chance, even if that means playing something speculative. But I think queen f5 is a good practical decision. That way the bishop sacrifice is not viable. If they did it now, I could just take with a pawn, and my queen is great here defending these pawns. So they traded instead, and I just took this way. No reason to open the e-file, and yeah, white somewhat prematurely resigned, but they are going to be down a pawn. We're going to win this. Yeah, and that eval is consistent with just black being up a pawn, white having nothing to show for it. All right, so I think this analysis was near as long as the game, if not more so, but lots to be learned. This is a fun line. I like playing this line for both sides. Somewhere right around here. I think I could have played it better. Not sure a6, taking, and rook c8 is the best order of moves. Probably allowing e4 and with the possibility of bishop takes e6 up for grabs. I think I can improve on this move order. I'll have to hit the database and find out for sure. So thank you guys for watching. I'll be back tomorrow with another video. Talk to you guys later. Bye.